Rebecca Anderson's scream pierced the humid Georgia night as she watched her 12-year-old daughter disappear into the darkness behind three bloodied Marines. The coffee mug slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering against the porch steps. This wasn't supposed to be Lily's fight. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson dropped her phone, the emergency operator's voice crackling into silence. Thor's massive German Shepherd frame had gone rigid, every muscle coiled like a loaded spring. The metallic scent of blood mixed with gunpowder hung in the air like a prayer gone wrong. Rebecca remembered tucking Lily into bed just an hour ago, kissing her forehead, whispering promises about tomorrow's pancakes. Now her baby was somewhere in that alley with a madman and three dying soldiers. "Get every unit to Maple Street now!" Captain Hayes barked into his radio, his weathered hands shaking for the first time in 20 years of service. What kind of monster targets Marines on American soil? And why did it take a child and her dog to find them before it was too late? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, Lily Anderson had found Thor behind Murphy's Diner, ribs showing through matted fur, an infected wound festering on his left shoulder. The German Shepherd was massive, even in his weakened state, nearly 90 pounds of muscle and bone that should have been intimidating. Instead, he'd whimpered when she approached, golden eyes holding the kind of pain that comes from betrayal by human hands. "Easy, boy," she'd whispered, extending her small fist for him to sniff. "Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." Thor had flinched at first contact, a reflexive cringe that spoke of kicks and harsh words. But something in Lily's voice, some quality of genuine care, had penetrated his defenses. He'd allowed her to touch his head, then his neck, then had collapsed against her thin frame as if surrendering to hope one more time. Rebecca Anderson had found them there an hour later, her daughter cradling 60 pounds of injured dog like he weighed nothing. "Lily, honey, we can't afford—" "Please, Mom." The desperation in her daughter's voice had stopped Rebecca cold. "Look at his eyes." And she had looked. Past the matted fur and open wounds, past the obvious signs of abuse and neglect, Rebecca had seen intelligence. Loyalty. The kind of devotion that doesn't come from training but from the soul. She'd also seen her daughter's face, lit up with purpose for the first time since her father had walked out 2 years prior. "One trip to the vet," Rebecca had conceded. "We'll patch him up and find him a good home." That was 93 days ago. Thor had never left Lily's side since. The veterinary bills had consumed Rebecca's grocery budget for 6 weeks. Her nursing textbooks, carefully preserved from her abandoned college dreams, had been sold to pay for antibiotics. But watching Lily and Thor together, the way he positioned himself between her and strangers, the way she read to him from library books, the way they seemed to communicate without words, Rebecca knew they'd gained something worth more than money. "He's not like other dogs," old Mrs. Patterson had observed one afternoon, watching Thor guide Lily safely across the busy street. "That one's got purpose written in his bones." Rebecca worked double shifts at the textile plant and weekend catering jobs to keep food on their table and kibble in Thor's bowl. Their small apartment on Elm Street wasn't much. Peeling paint, creaky floorboards, neighbors who played music too loud, but it was theirs. And for the first time since her ex-husband had left them with nothing but debt and broken promises, Rebecca felt like they were building something that mattered. "We're a family now," Lily would whisper to Thor each night, her small arms wrapped around his thick neck. "The three of us against the world." Thor would thump his tail once against the threadbare carpet, a sound that had become Rebecca's favorite lullaby. None of them could have imagined that in 3 months their quiet life would explode into something extraordinary. The evening air hung thick with August humidity as Lily and Thor made their way down Maple Street toward Mrs. Patterson's corner store. The old woman had promised to save them some day-old bread and bruised apples. Charity disguised as kindness, the way small southern towns had perfected over generations. Thor walked close to Lily's left side, his massive frame creating a protective barrier between her and the street. "Just a quick trip, boy," Lily whispered, adjusting her grip on the empty canvas bag. "Mom's working late again." Thor's ears twitched at the mention of Rebecca. He'd learned to read the stress lines around the woman's eyes, the way her shoulders sagged when bills arrived, the forced brightness in her voice when she assured Lily everything was fine. Tonight had been different. Rebecca's hands had shaken as she counted crumpled dollar bills, her "be careful, honey" carrying an edge of desperation. As they approached the alley behind Morrison's pawn shop, Thor suddenly stopped. His nostrils flared, taking in scents that made his hackles rise. Blood, sweat, fear, and underneath it all, something that triggered a memory he couldn't quite grasp. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with desert sand. A low groan echoed from the shadows. Lily froze, her hand instinctively finding Thor's thick fur. "Did you hear that?" Another sound, distinctly human, distinctly in pain. Thor's body went rigid, every instinct screaming danger, while something deeper, something inherited, urged him forward. He took a step toward the alley mouth, then looked back at Lily, torn between protecting her and investigating the source of distress. "Someone's hurt," Lily breathed, pulling out her phone's flashlight. The weak beam barely penetrated the darkness, but it caught something that made her stomach lurch. Camouflage fabric, military boots, a spreading dark stain that could only be blood. "Hello?" she called softly. "Do you need help?" The response was a wet cough followed by a voice rough with pain. "Run, kid! Get out of here!" But Lily was already moving forward, Thor reluctantly matching her pace. What they found in that alley would haunt her dreams for months afterward. 3 Marines lay bound and bloodied against the brick wall. The first was a tall man with sergeant's stripes, his face swollen beyond recognition. The second, a Hispanic corporal, had blood seeping from a head wound that matted his dark hair. The youngest looked barely out of high school, his uniform torn and stained, breathing in shallow gasps. Standing over them was a figure in a dark jacket, his back to Lily. He was kicking the sergeant in the ribs with methodical precision, each impact accompanied by a grunt of effort. "This is for Kandahar," the man snarled. "This is for leaving me behind. This is for Sarah." Thor erupted before Lily could react. 110 pounds of German Shepherd launched through the air, hitting the attacker square in the back. They went down in a tangle of limbs and snarling fury, Thor's teeth finding purchase in the man's jacket sleeve. "Get off me!" The attacker, a broad-shouldered man with prematurely gray hair, threw Thor aside with surprising strength. The dog hit the brick wall with a sickening thud but scrambled to his feet, positioning himself between Lily and the threat. For the first time, Lily got a clear look at their attacker's face. Dylan Mitchell was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of lean build that spoke of military training. But his eyes held a wildness that made her step back involuntarily. "You shouldn't be here, kid," Dylan said, his voice surprisingly gentle even as he brandished what looked like a combat knife. "This isn't your fight." "Neither was theirs," Lily shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. "Whatever happened to you, they don't deserve this." Dylan's face twisted with rage. "Don't deserve it. These heroes left me to die in Afghanistan, left me bleeding in the sand while they completed their mission. You know what I got for my service? A medical discharge and a daughter who died while I was in a VA psych ward." The sergeant, Carter, according to his name tape, managed to lift his head. "Dylan, we tried to come back for you. Orders were to—" "Orders!" Dylan kicked him again, harder this time. "Orders don't bring back my little girl. Orders don't fix what you broke inside me." Thor growled low in his throat, and something flickered in Dylan's expression. "That's a German shepherd. Military working dog?" "He's mine," Lily said firmly. "Looks like his daddy might have been overseas. Might have known some of the same hell." Dylan's voice carried an odd note of kinship. "Smart dogs, German shepherds, loyal. They don't abandon their pack." The sound of approaching sirens pierced the night air. Someone had heard the commotion and called for help. Dylan's head snapped up. Then he looked at Lily with something almost like regret. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Not by a long shot." Then he was gone, disappearing into the maze of alleys that crisscrossed downtown Millbrook like a spider's web. 24 hours after the alley incident, Millbrook General Hospital buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with typical medical emergencies. Captain Robert Hayes of the Marine Corps Criminal Investigation Division sat across from Lily in the pediatric waiting room, his weathered face kind but serious. Thor lay at her feet, officially allowed in the hospital after a hastily arranged therapy animal designation. "You did something extraordinary last night," Captain Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades in uniform. "Those Marines, Sergeant Carter, Corporal Torres, and Private Wilson, they're going to make full recoveries because of you." Lily fidgeted with Thor's collar, still processing everything that had happened. "I just did what anyone would do." "No, child," Mrs. Patterson interjected from her chair beside Rebecca. The elderly woman had appointed herself unofficial spokesperson for the community response. "Most folks would have kept walking. You chose to look into that darkness when it would have been easier to turn away." Rebecca squeezed her daughter's hand, pride and terror warring in her expression. She'd spent the night in the hospital, unwilling to let Lily out of her sight after learning how close they'd come to losing her. Captain Hayes leaned forward, his tone growing more serious. "What I'm about to tell you needs to stay in this room for now. The man who attacked those Marines, his name is Dylan Mitchell. He's a former Marine himself, served with distinction in Afghanistan until an IED explosion cost him his left leg and left him with severe traumatic brain injury." "But why would he hurt other Marines?" Lily asked, her young mind struggling to process the contradiction. "Dylan was part of a patrol that got ambushed 3 years ago, the same patrol these 3 men were on. When the IED went off, Dylan was thrown clear, but badly injured. The squad had to make an impossible choice: evacuate him immediately and risk the entire unit, or secure the area first and come back for him." Thor's ears perked up at something in the captain's tone, some frequency of pain that resonated with memories buried in canine instinct. "They chose the mission," Captain Hayes continued. "It's what we're trained to do. Save the many, even if it means risking the few. But Dylan doesn't see it that way. His injuries were severe, and by the time he was stabilized and shipped home, his 8-year-old daughter, Sarah, had been killed in a car accident. His ex-wife blamed him for not being there to pick her up from school that day." Rebecca's hand flew to her throat. "Oh, dear God. Dylan's been in and out of VA hospitals ever since. PTSD, survivor's guilt, traumatic brain injury. It's a perfect storm for someone to lose their way. We think he's been tracking these Marines for months, planning this revenge, Mrs." Patterson shook her gray head sadly. "That poor man, broken by war, broken by loss. But that doesn't give him the right to break others." "The concerning part," Captain Hayes said, looking directly at Lily, "is that he escaped last night. And based on what you overheard, this isn't finished. Dylan specifically mentioned your dog, noticed Thor's breed. There might be more to this connection than we initially thought." As if summoned by his name, Thor lifted his massive head and placed it on Lily's knee. His golden eyes held an intensity that made Captain Hayes pause. "Has Thor ever shown unusual behavioral patterns, exceptional tracking abilities, responses to military personnel?" Lily thought back to the many times Thor had guided her away from certain streets, steered her clear of men in uniform who seemed agitated, positioned himself protectively when veterans with haunted eyes approached them in the park. "He doesn't like loud noises," she said slowly. "Fireworks, backfiring cars, anything that sounds like gunshots, I guess. And he's always been protective of people who seem hurt or scared." Captain Hayes exchanged a meaningful look with Rebecca. "Mrs. Anderson, I need to ask you something that might sound strange. Do you know anything about Thor's parentage, his background before Lily found him?" "Just that he was abused," Rebecca said. "The vet said he showed signs of systematic mistreatment, but also advanced training. Almost like he'd been in some kind of working dog program." Thor's tail began to wag slowly, and he turned to look directly at Captain Hayes with an expression that bordered on recognition. "There's something else," Captain Hayes said carefully. "Dylan Mitchell wasn't just any Marine. He was a dog handler. His canine partner was a German shepherd named Rex, one of the most decorated military working dogs in recent history. Rex died saving the lives of those same 3 Marines the night Dylan was injured." The room fell silent except for the soft whoosh of the hospital's ventilation system. Thor's entire body had gone still, his breathing barely perceptible. "You think Thor is—" Rebecca began. "I think Thor might be Rex's son," Captain Hayes said quietly. "The timeline fits. Rex was bred at Lackland Air Force Base before deployment. His offspring would have been born around the time Dylan was medically discharged. If Thor somehow ended up in civilian hands, possibly through military surplus or abandonment." Lily looked down at Thor, seeing him with new eyes, the intelligence that seemed almost human, the protective instincts that went beyond normal pet behavior. The way he'd immediately known those Marines needed help, despite never having met them before. It would explain why Dylan reacted to him the way he did, Captain Hayes continued, and why Thor responded so aggressively to Dylan. "There might be genetic memory at work here, instincts passed down from father to son." Mrs. Patterson wiped at her eyes with a tissue. "That dog has been carrying his daddy's mission all this time, hasn't he? Protecting and serving, even without a uniform." Thor looked around the circle of adults, then up at Lily with an expression that seemed to ask if she understood now why he'd been placed in her path, why their bond felt deeper than simple pet ownership, why he'd risk everything to protect not just her, but anyone who needed saving. The weight of legacy settled around them like a warm blanket, connecting past to present, father to son, duty to love. The next 48 hours transformed Millbrook from a quiet Georgia town into the center of a story that would capture hearts across America. News vans lined Maple Street, their satellite dishes reaching toward gray skies that threatened afternoon thunderstorms. Reporters interviewed anyone willing to talk about the girl and her hero dog, though most locals maintained the Southern tradition of polite deflection when it came to family business. Rebecca found herself fielding calls from producers, journalists, and well-meaning strangers who wanted to turn their ordeal into entertainment. She declined them all, focusing instead on the growing investigation and the safety of her daughter. "Dylan Mitchell has been spotted twice since the incident," Captain Hayes explained during their morning briefing at the police station. "Once at a gas station outside Valdosta, and again at a truck stop near the Florida border. He's moving south, but we don't think he's running. We think he's regrouping." Thor lay beneath Lily's chair, his massive frame alert despite the appearance of rest. Over the past 2 days, his behavior had grown increasingly protective. He refused to let Lily out of his sight, positioning himself between her and doorways, studying every stranger with golden eyes that missed nothing. Detective Maria Santos, a 20-year veteran of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, spread crime scene photos across the conference table. The alley attack wasn't random violence. It was methodical, calculated. Dylan brought zip ties, a combat knife, and what appears to be sodium pentothal, truth serum. He wasn't just planning to hurt those Marines. He was planning to make them confess. Confess to what? Rebecca asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. To abandoning him, to choosing the mission over his life, to being responsible for every tragedy that followed. Detective Santos pulled up a file on her laptop. We've been digging into Dylan's background since the attack. What we found paints a picture of a man systematically destroyed by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The screen showed military records, medical files, and personal documentation that told the story of a hero's fall from grace. Dylan Mitchell had been a model Marine, commended for valor, trusted with the lives of military working dogs. His K-9 partner Rex had saved dozens of lives during their deployment. The night Dylan was injured, his squad was ambushed while escorting a convoy through Taliban-controlled territory, Detective Santos continued. Rex detected IEDs buried in the road and alerted the convoy, saving everyone except the rear vehicle where Dylan was riding. When the explosion went off, Dylan was thrown 30 feet and badly injured. Captain Hayes took over the narrative. Rex immediately went to work, performing his trained response to handler injury. But the squad was still taking fire, and they had to make the tactical decision to establish a defensive perimeter before they could evacuate casualties. It took them 18 minutes to secure the area and get Dylan to safety. 18 minutes, Rebecca whispered, imagining those eternal moments of pain and abandonment. Rex stayed with Dylan the entire time, despite being wounded himself. When the squad finally reached them, Rex had positioned himself over Dylan's body, protecting him from secondary explosions. But Rex had been hit by shrapnel and was bleeding out. Dylan was conscious enough to watch his partner die in his arms. Thor's head lifted slightly, ears twitching as if he could hear echoes of a story written in his DNA. Lily reached down to stroke his thick fur, understanding for the first time the weight of legacy he carried. Dylan never recovered from that night, Detective Santos said. Not physically, not mentally, not emotionally. The traumatic brain injury affected his impulse control and judgment. The PTSD manifested in severe paranoia and delusions of abandonment. And losing Rex broke something fundamental in his ability to trust. What about his daughter? Mrs. Patterson asked. The elderly woman had insisted on attending the briefing, claiming community members had a right to know what threatened their children. Sarah Mitchell was 8 when Dylan was deployed. She was Daddy's little girl, and his deployment was supposed to be his last. He'd promised her he was coming home for good. Detective Santos pulled up a school photo of a blonde child with Dylan's same intense eyes. While Dylan was in the VA hospital recovering from his injuries, Sarah was staying with her mother's sister. One afternoon, the aunt was running late picking her up from school. Sarah decided to walk home alone and was hit by a drunk driver 2 blocks from her house. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of thunder. Even Thor seemed to sense the weight of the tragedy being recounted. Dylan was released from the hospital 3 days after Sarah's funeral. His ex-wife blamed him for not being there to protect their daughter. The guilt compounded his existing PTSD, and he began experiencing what doctors call survivor's guilt spiral, the belief that everyone he cares about dies because he fails to protect them. So he fixated on the Marines, who he believed failed to protect him, Rebecca said, the psychology becoming clearer. Exactly. In Dylan's damaged mind, if Sergeant Carter, Corporal Torres, and Private Wilson had moved faster to evacuate him, he would have been home in time to save Sarah. Their 18-minute tactical delay cost him everything that mattered. Captain Hayes pulled out another file. But there's something else we discovered, something that directly relates to Thor. The German shepherd's ears perked up at the mention of his name, and he sat up straighter as if preparing for important news. Rex wasn't just any military working dog. He was part of an experimental breeding program designed to produce canines with enhanced protective instincts and superior intelligence. Only 12 puppies were produced from Rex's bloodline before the program was discontinued due to budget cuts. "Where did the puppies go?" Lily asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Most were placed with military families or law enforcement, but 3 were deemed unsuitable for service due to what evaluators called excessive emotional attachment to handlers. They were released to civilian adoption agencies. Captain Hayes looked directly at Thor. One of those puppies was adopted by a family in Alabama. 6 months later, he was surrendered to a shelter when the family moved overseas. From there, the trail goes cold until I found him behind Murphy's Diner," Lily finished. Detective Santos nodded. "Thor didn't just randomly end up in Millbrook, and he didn't randomly bond with you. His father's genetics programmed him to seek out people who need protection, to form unbreakable bonds with those he perceives as his pack. When he found you, a vulnerable child in a vulnerable family, every instinct Rex passed down activated." Thor stood and walked to Lily's chair, placing his massive head on her lap. His golden eyes looked up at her with an expression that seemed to say, "Now you understand." "There's more," Captain Hayes said grimly. "Dylan has been researching Rex's offspring. We found internet searches on his confiscated laptop, inquiries to breeding registries, even contact with military personnel who worked with Rex. He knows Thor is Rex's son." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Mrs. Patterson gasped. Rebecca reached for Lily's hand, and Detective Santos began typing rapidly on her phone. "You think he's coming back for Thor?" Lily said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I think Dylan sees Thor as the last living connection to Rex, and by extension, to the night that destroyed his life. In his fractured mental state, Thor represents either salvation or revenge, possibly both." Thunder rumbled closer now, and the first drops of rain began pattering against the police station windows. Thor's body tensed, not from the storm but from something deeper, an ancestral memory of danger approaching. "What do we do?" Rebecca asked, her mother's protective instincts warring with the knowledge that running might not be enough. Captain Hayes and Detective Santos exchanged glances before Santos spoke. "We're setting up a safe house arrangement. Military protection, around-the-clock security, but there's something else we need to consider." "What?" "Dylan Mitchell isn't just a damaged veteran, he's a highly trained Marine with specialized knowledge of tactics, weapons, and military working dogs. If he's determined to get to Thor, traditional security measures might not be enough." Mrs. Patterson stood up slowly, her cane tapping against the linoleum floor. "Then we don't just hide. We fight back." "Ma'am, this isn't a matter for civilian involvement." "Young man," Mrs. Patterson interrupted Captain Hayes with the authority of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. "This town has been taking care of its own since before you were born. That little girl and her dog saved 3 of your Marines when your system failed them. Now it's our turn to save her." Thor's tail began to wag slowly, as if approving of the elderly woman's declaration of war. Outside, the storm was building, but inside the police station, something else was gathering strength, the kind of community determination that had built small towns and defended them through generations of threats. The battle for Thor's life and Lily's safety was about to begin. The safe house on Peachtree Road looked like any other suburban home in Millbrook's historic district. White columns, wraparound porch, magnolia trees casting dappled shadows across the front yard. What wasn't visible were the motion sensors, reinforced windows, and 3 Marine security specialists positioned at strategic points around the property. Lily sat on the living room couch, Thor's massive frame pressed against her legs, both of them staring out the window at a world that had suddenly become dangerous. It had been 36 hours since they'd moved to the safe house, and the forced inactivity was wearing on everyone's nerves. "I keep thinking about what Captain Hayes said," Lily murmured to Thor, scratching behind his ears, "about you carrying your daddy's mission. Do you remember him at all?" Thor's golden eyes held depths that seemed far older than his 6 years. He leaned into her touch but remained alert, ears rotating toward every sound, the refrigerator humming, footsteps on the porch, the distant rumble of traffic on Highway 41. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, the lead security coordinator. Gonzalez was a compact woman in her 30s, with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of quiet competence that came from multiple deployments in hostile territory. "Any word from Detective Santos?" Rebecca asked, settling into an armchair that gave her a clear view of both the front and back entrances. "Dylan's been spotted again," Gonzalez said, checking her phone. "This time at a sporting goods store in Tifton, purchasing camping equipment and what the clerk described as survivalist gear. He paid cash and left in a different vehicle, a stolen pickup truck with Tennessee plates." "He's getting closer," Rebecca observed, her mother's intuition reading between the lines. "Yes, ma'am, but he's also making mistakes, switching vehicles, paying cash, shopping for supplies. These are the actions of someone operating on emotion rather than training. That gives us an advantage." Thor's head suddenly snapped toward the back door, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Gonzalez was on her feet immediately, hand moving to her sidearm while speaking quietly into her radio. "Perimeter check, all stations, report." The responses came back quickly. "North side clear, east side clear, south side, wait. Movement in the tree line, approximately 50 meters out." Thor stood and moved to position himself between Lily and the back door, every muscle in his powerful body coiled for action. His behavior had changed subtly over the past day, becoming more like a working dog than a pet. The genetic programming Captain Hayes had mentioned was activating under threat. "Could be a deer," Gonzalez said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "Or could be our friend Dylan conducting reconnaissance." The radio crackled again. "Negative on deer. Thermal imaging shows human-sized heat signature, stationary for the past 10 minutes. Subject appears to be observing the house." Rebecca moved to Lily's side, her hand finding her daughter's shoulder. "What do we do?" "We wait," Gonzalez said firmly. "Dylan wants us to panic, to make mistakes. He's testing our response, learning our patterns. The best thing we can do is show him this house is a fortress he can't crack." But Thor had different ideas. The German shepherd moved to the back door and began pawing at it, whining softly. When no one responded, he looked back at Lily with an expression that clearly communicated his desire to go outside and confront whatever threat lurked in the darkness. "No, boy," Lily said firmly. "We stay inside where it's safe." Thor's whine became more insistent. He paced between the door and Lily, his agitation growing by the minute. Finally, he did something none of them expected. He barked once, sharply, then sat down facing the door in what any military personnel would recognize as an alert position. "He's trained," Gonzalez observed with professional interest. "Not just protective instincts, formal training. Someone taught him tactical positioning. His father was a military working dog," Rebecca explained. "Captain Hayes thinks the training might be genetic memory." Thor barked again, this time looking directly at Gonzalez as if trying to communicate with the one person in the room who might understand military protocol. His message was clear. There was a threat outside, and his job was to neutralize it. The radio crackled. "Heat signature is moving. Subject is approaching the house from the south, using the tree line for cover." Gonzalez made a quick decision. "All units, maintain position, but prepare for contact. Mrs. Anderson, Take Lily upstairs to the safe room we showed you yesterday. Lock the door and don't come out until I give you the all clear." But as they started toward the stairs, Thor refused to move. He planted himself at the bottom of the staircase, blocking their path, and looked up at Lily with eyes that held a lifetime of inherited purpose. "He won't leave you," Rebecca realized. Just like his father wouldn't leave Dylan. The sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen, followed immediately by the hiss of something being thrown through the window. Smoke began billowing from the back of the house, not the thick black smoke of a fire, but the white acrid cloud of a military smoke grenade. "Gas masks, now!" Gonzalez shouted, pulling emergency equipment from a tactical bag. "He's trying to flush us out." But Thor had already moved into action. The massive German shepherd bounded toward the kitchen, his training overriding every protective instinct that told him to stay with Lily. He disappeared into the smoke like a ghost, and moments later they heard the unmistakable sounds of combat: human curses, canine snarling, and the crash of furniture being overturned. "Thor!" Lily screamed, starting toward the kitchen despite Rebecca's attempts to hold her back. A gunshot rang out, then another. The fighting sounds stopped abruptly, replaced by an ominous silence that was somehow worse than the chaos. Gonzalez grabbed her radio. "All units converge on the kitchen." Shots fired. "Dog down. Repeat. Dog down." The words hit Lily like physical blows. She broke free from her mother's grip and ran toward the smoke-filled kitchen, Rebecca and Gonzalez close behind. The smoke was clearing now, revealing overturned chairs, broken dishes, and a back door standing wide open. Thor lay motionless near the stove, a spreading pool of blood beneath his massive frame. His golden eyes were open but unfocused, and his breathing was barely perceptible. Lily dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his wounds but afraid to touch him. "No, no, no," she whispered. "Thor, please, don't leave me." The German shepherd's eyes found hers, and with tremendous effort he lifted his head just enough to lick her hand once before collapsing back to the floor. "He's alive," Gonzalez said, kneeling to check Thor's pulse. "But barely. We need a veterinarian now." Rebecca was already on her phone calling Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the town's only emergency veterinary clinic. As she spoke rapidly to the answering service, Gonzalez's radio crackled with reports from the perimeter team. Suspect escaped in the stolen pickup, heading north on Peachtree Road toward Highway 41. All units in pursuit. But Dylan Mitchell's escape was the least of their concerns now. Thor's breathing was becoming more labored, and the pool of blood was expanding despite Gonzalez's attempts to apply pressure to the wounds. "The bullet went through his shoulder," Gonzalez reported. "Missed the major arteries, but there's internal damage. He needs surgery." Dr. Mitchell arrived within 15 minutes, her emergency kit in hand and her face grim with professional concern. She was a woman in her mid-40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of steady hands that came from years of emergency veterinary work. "Help me get him onto this stretcher," she instructed, setting up a portable gurney. "We need to get him to the clinic immediately." As they carefully lifted Thor's unconscious form, Lily noticed something clutched in his front paw, a piece of torn fabric that looked like military camouflage. Even in his injured state, Thor had managed to mark his attacker. "He fought for us," Lily said, tears streaming down her face. "Just like his daddy." Dr. Mitchell paused in her preparations to look at the young girl with professional compassion. "He's a fighter, honey. And he's got the best reason in the world to survive. He's got you to come home to." But as they loaded Thor into Dr. Mitchell's emergency vehicle, none of them could ignore the severity of his condition. The German shepherd, who had saved 3 Marines and protected his family, was now fighting for his own life, and the outcome was far from certain. The drive to the veterinary clinic took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Thunder rumbled overhead as the Georgia storm that had been threatening all day finally broke open, sending sheets of rain across the windshield and turning the world outside into a blur of water and darkness. As they pulled into the clinic parking lot, Dylan Mitchell's stolen pickup truck sat empty under a streetlight 2 blocks away, its doors standing open and interior soaked by rain. He had accomplished his mission, separating Thor from his pack, leaving them all vulnerable and heartbroken. But he had underestimated the bond between a girl and her dog, and the lengths that love will go to bring family home. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Mitchell's veterinary clinic cast harsh shadows across the operating room as she worked frantically to save Thor's life. The German Shepherd lay motionless on the steel table, his massive chest barely rising and falling beneath the oxygen mask. 2 bullet wounds, one through his left shoulder and another that had grazed his ribs, had caused significant blood loss and internal trauma. Lily pressed her face against the observation window, her small hands leaving fog prints on the glass. Rebecca stood behind her, one hand on her daughter's shoulder, the other clutching a tissue that had long since been soaked through with tears. "His blood pressure is dropping," Dr. Mitchell called to her assistant, a young man named Kevin, who had been roused from sleep to help with the emergency surgery. "We need to get these bullets out and stop the internal bleeding, but he's losing too much blood too fast." Staff Sergeant Gonzalez paced the waiting room, her radio crackling with updates from the manhunt for Dylan Mitchell. The stolen pickup had been found abandoned near the Ocmulgee River, but there was no trace of Dylan himself. K-9 units from 3 counties were searching the area, but the rain was washing away scent trails. "Ma'am," came a voice through the radio, "we found something in the truck. Looks like Dylan left behind a journal. You're going to want to see this." 20 minutes later, Detective Santos arrived at the clinic with a plastic evidence bag containing a worn composition notebook. The pages were filled with Dylan's increasingly erratic handwriting, documenting months of surveillance, planning, and a descent into obsession that painted a disturbing picture of his mental state. "Listen to this," Santos said, reading from the journal. "Day 127. Saw the girl and Rex's son today. She doesn't know what she has. Doesn't know that dog carries the soul of the only partner who never abandoned me. If I can't have Rex back, at least I can make sure his son knows the truth about those cowards." Rebecca shuddered. "He's been watching us for months." "It gets worse," Santos continued. Day 143. The dog protects her the way Rex protected me. But Rex died because of Carter and Torres and Wilson. They let him bleed out while they played soldier. Now his son will pay for their sins. Through the observation window, Dr. Mitchell was performing chest compressions on Thor's still form. The heart monitor showed an irregular rhythm that was growing weaker by the minute. Kevin was hanging a second bag of blood substitute, but even Lily could see it might not be enough. "We're losing him," Dr. Mitchell said, her voice strained with exhaustion and frustration. "He needs a massive blood transfusion, but we don't have enough canine blood on hand for a dog his size." Mrs. Patterson, who had arrived an hour earlier with a thermos of coffee and a determined expression, stood up suddenly. "What about other dogs? Can they donate blood like people do?" Dr. Mitchell paused in her compressions. "In theory, yes. German Shepherds are universal donors in the canine world. But I'd need multiple healthy dogs of significant size, and the blood typing process takes time we don't have." "How many dogs?" Mrs. Patterson asked, already reaching for her phone. "At least 3, maybe 4 large dogs. 60 pounds minimum." Mrs. Patterson began dialing numbers with the efficiency of someone who had organized church potlucks and community fundraisers for 6 decades. "Martha, it's Ellie. I need you to bring Duke to Dr. Mitchell's clinic right now. Yes, I know it's past midnight. That little girl's dog is dying and we're going to save him." Within 30 minutes, the clinic parking lot looked like a dog show. Martha Henley arrived with Duke, her 85-pound golden retriever. Jim Crawford brought both of his labs, Buster and Belle. The Kowalski family showed up with their German Shepherd mix, Bear, still wearing his service dog vest from his work with their autistic son. "I heard on the police scanner," Jim explained to Rebecca as volunteers helped organize the impromptu blood drive, "that dog of yours saved 3 Marines. Figure it's time the community returned the favor." Dr. Mitchell and Kevin worked with assembly line efficiency, drawing blood from the donor dogs while their owners held them steady and whispered encouragement. The dogs seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, submitting to the procedure with unusual calm. "It's like they know," Martha observed as Duke barely flinched during the blood draw. "Animals understand things we don't sometimes." Back in the operating room, Thor's vital signs began to stabilize as the fresh blood flowed into his system. His heart rate strengthened and his breathing became more regular. Dr. Mitchell was able to extract both bullets and repair the internal damage, but the surgery had taken a tremendous toll on the young dog's body. "He's stable," Dr. Mitchell announced as she emerged from the operating room 3 hours after the surgery began. But the next 24 hours are critical. The trauma was severe, and there's always a risk of complications. Lily had fallen asleep in Rebecca's lap, exhausted by the emotional strain of the night. When she woke to hear Dr. Mitchell's words, her first question was simple. "Can I see him?" Thor lay in the recovery room, surrounded by monitoring equipment and IV lines. He was conscious but sedated, his golden eyes tracking movement but unable to lift his massive head. When Lily entered the room, his tail gave the faintest wag against the blanket covering his lower body. "Hey, boy," Lily whispered, settling into a chair beside his recovery bed. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Thor's eyes fixed on her face, and with tremendous effort he managed to lift his head just enough to rest it against her hand. The simple gesture broke through the emotional dam Lily had been building since the attack, and she dissolved into tears that carried 12 years of fear, loneliness, and love. "I was so scared," she whispered into his fur. "I thought you were going to leave me like Daddy did. But you're stronger than that, aren't you? You're a hero. Just like your daddy." Staff Sergeant Gonzalez entered the room quietly, her radio turned low. "We found Dylan," she announced. "State police spotted him at a truck stop near Macon. He didn't resist arrest." Rebecca looked up from where she sat beside Lily. "Is it over?" "The immediate threat is over. But Dylan is asking to see Thor. Claims he has something important to say about Rex that might help with the dog's recovery." Dr. Mitchell frowned. "Absolutely not. This animal has been through enough trauma. I won't have his recovery jeopardized by—" "What if it helps?" Lily interrupted, her young voice carrying surprising authority. "What if Dylan knows something about Thor's daddy that could make him better?" The adults exchanged glances, weighing the risks against the possibility that Dylan's military experience with Rex might provide medical insight that could aid Thor's recovery. "He'd be in shackles," Gonzalez said. "Full security escort, 5 minutes maximum." Dr. Mitchell checked Thor's vital signs one more time before reluctantly agreeing. "If his stress levels spike even slightly, we end it immediately." Dylan Mitchell entered the recovery room 40 minutes later, flanked by 2 deputies and moving with the careful shuffle of someone in leg irons. The past few days had aged him dramatically. His eyes, while still haunted, held a clarity that had been absent during the attack. He stopped when he saw Thor, and for a moment his carefully controlled expression cracked. "He looks just like Rex," he whispered. "Same markings on the chest, same intelligent eyes." "You have 5 minutes," Gonzalez warned. Dylan nodded and moved closer to Thor's bedside, staying within the restraints of his shackles. The German shepherd's ears perked up slightly, but he showed no fear, only the alert attention of a dog assessing a potential threat. "I'm sorry," Dylan said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry I hurt you." You were just protecting your pack, same as your daddy protected his. That's what good dogs do. And I know Rex raised you to be good." Thor's tail moved slightly against the blanket. Not quite a wag, but acknowledgement of the words. Dylan reached slowly into his pocket, producing a small, worn dog tag. This was Rex's. He was wearing it the night he died saving those Marines. I've carried it every day since, but it belongs with his son now. He placed the tag on the bed beside Thor's head, and the German shepherd sniffed it once before closing his eyes, as if finally understanding a piece of his heritage he'd been missing. The weight of legacy, love, and loss settled over the room like a benediction, connecting father to son across the divide of death, and perhaps beginning the healing that both Dylan and Thor desperately needed. The revelation of Rex's dog tag had sparked something unexpected in the recovery room, not just in Thor, but in Dylan Mitchell himself. As the days passed and Thor's condition slowly improved, Dylan requested daily visits through his court-appointed attorney, claiming his knowledge of Rex's training methods might aid in the German shepherd's rehabilitation. Dr. Mitchell was skeptical, but she couldn't argue with the results. Thor's recovery had accelerated dramatically after Dylan's first visit. The dog's appetite returned, his mobility improved, and most remarkably, he began responding to commands that no one had taught him, military hand signals that Dylan demonstrated from his wheelchair at a safe distance. "It's like watching genetic memory activate," Dr. Mitchell explained to Rebecca and Lily during Thor's 5th day of recovery. "Dylan's presence seems to unlock training protocols that Rex passed down to his offspring. I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of veterinary practice." Lily wasn't entirely comfortable with Dylan's visits, but she couldn't deny that Thor seemed more alert and engaged when the former Marine was present. There was an unspoken communication between them, a recognition of shared loss and inherited purpose that transcended their recent conflict. "Why did you hurt him if you knew he was Rex's son?" Lily asked during one supervised visit, her young voice carrying a directness that made the adults in the room uncomfortable. Dylan was quiet for a long moment, his shackled hands folded in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of guilt and regret. "Because I was angry at Rex for dying," he said simply. "Angry at him for leaving me alone with all that pain. When I saw Thor, I saw everything I'd lost, my partner, my daughter, my purpose. I wanted him to hurt the way I was hurting." Thor, who had been lying quietly on his recovery bed, lifted his head and looked directly at Dylan. There was no fear in the German shepherd's golden eyes, only the kind of patient understanding that seemed to run in his bloodline. "But that wasn't Rex's fault," Lily said. "And it wasn't Thor's fault either." "No," Dylan agreed, his voice breaking slightly. "It was mine. I let the pain turn me into something Rex would have been ashamed of, something Sarah would have been ashamed of." The mention of his daughter's name caused Dylan to close his eyes, and when he opened them again they held a clarity that had been absent since his breakdown began. "I need to tell you something," he said to Lily. "Something about Thor's daddy that might help you understand why your dog is so special." Dr. Mitchell checked Thor's monitors before nodding for Dylan to continue. The German shepherd's vital signs remained stable, and his attention was focused entirely on Dylan's voice. "Rex wasn't just trained to detect explosives or track enemies," Dylan began. "He was part of a program called Project Guardian Angel. They bred dogs with enhanced emotional intelligence, dogs that could sense PTSD episodes, predict panic attacks, even calm soldiers during psychological breaks." Thor's ears perked up and he tilted his head slightly as if recognizing something in Dylan's words. "The night Rex died, he wasn't just protecting me from the explosion. He was trying to keep me calm while we waited for rescue. He could sense my panic, my fear, and he was doing what he was bred to do." Be my guardian angel." Lily looked down at Thor, understanding flooding her face. "That's why he always knows when I'm scared. Why he positions himself between me and anything that might hurt me." "Rex passed more than just his physical traits to his offspring," Dylan continued. "He passed down his mission. Thor found you because you needed him, and he needed you to give his life purpose." Staff Sergeant Gonzalez, who had been monitoring the conversation from the corner of the room, stepped forward. "Dylan, there's something else. Something we discovered while investigating your case." Dylan looked up, confusion flickering across his face. "The night Rex died, the delay in evacuation wasn't because the squad chose the mission over you. Communications had been jammed by enemy forces. Carter, Torres, and Wilson spent those 18 minutes trying to call in air support while fighting off a secondary attack. They couldn't evacuate you safely without risking the entire convoy." The color drained from Dylan's face. "That's not..." The report said. The report was classified for operational security reasons. The full details were only released to families after a 3-year review process. By then, you were already deep into your PTSD treatment and not receiving correspondence. Rebecca watched Dylan's face as the implications sank in. 3 years of blame, rage, and planning for revenge, all based on incomplete information and a damaged mind's interpretation of abandonment. "They didn't leave me behind," Dylan whispered. "They were trying to save me." Thor struggled to his feet despite his injuries and with careful steps approached Dylan's wheelchair. The German shepherd placed his massive head on Dylan's lap, a gesture of forgiveness that broke through the former Marine's carefully constructed walls. "I'm so sorry," Dylan sobbed, his hands moving to stroke Thor's fur. "I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I hurt those good men. I'm sorry I let the pain make me forget what Rex taught me about loyalty and love." The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment and the quiet sound of a broken man finally beginning to heal. "Doctor." Mitchell cleared her throat professionally. "There's something else we need to discuss. Thor's injuries were severe, and while he's recovering well, he's going to need extensive physical therapy, the kind that's typically only available at specialized military working dog rehabilitation centers." Rebecca's heart sank. "We can't afford that kind of treatment. We barely managed the surgery bills, and that was with help from the community." "That's where I come in," Dylan said, wiping his eyes and straightening in his wheelchair. "I have a confession to make. I'm not the broke veteran I pretended to be. My disability benefits, combined with investments Sarah's mother left me, have been sitting untouched for 3 years. I have enough money to pay for Thor's treatment and more." He looked directly at Lily. "I want to establish a fund, the Rex and Sarah Memorial Foundation. It would provide medical care for working dogs and their offspring and support for military families dealing with PTSD." "Why?" Rebecca asked suspiciously. "Because I need to do something good with the pain instead of spreading it to innocent people. And because Rex deserves to have his legacy be about healing instead of hurt." Captain Hayes, who had arrived during the conversation, stepped forward with paperwork in his hands. "There's another option. The Marine Corps has been following Thor's story, and we'd like to offer him honorary induction into our military working dog program. It comes with full medical benefits, training support, and the option for him to work with veterans' therapy programs if he's interested." Lily looked at Thor, who had returned to his bed but was watching the conversation with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every word. "What would that mean for us?" she asked. "It means Thor would keep his mission," Captain Hayes explained. "He'd live with you and be your family dog, but he'd also have the opportunity to help other people who need healing, veterans with PTSD, children who've experienced trauma, families like yours who need a guardian angel." Thor's tail began to wag slowly, and he looked at Lily with an expression that seemed to ask for her permission to accept this calling. "It's your choice, boy," Lily whispered, moving to sit beside his bed. "You've already saved me. If you want to save other people too, I understand." Thor placed his paw on her hand, and in that moment, everyone in the room understood that they weren't just witnessing a dog's recovery. They were witnessing the birth of a legacy that would honor both Rex's sacrifice and Dylan's redemption. The foundation paperwork was signed that afternoon, establishing a fund that would grow to help hundreds of military working dogs and their handlers over the coming years. Dylan's legal case was resolved through a plea agreement that included mandatory PTSD treatment and community service working with veterans programs. But perhaps the most important healing happened in that recovery room, where a girl, a dog, and a broken man discovered that sometimes the greatest victories come not from revenge, but from forgiveness, and that love is indeed the most powerful force for transforming pain into purpose. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the windows of the newly opened Rex and Sarah Memorial Veterans Healing Center on the outskirts of Millbrook. The converted warehouse space buzzed with purposeful activity. Veterans in group therapy sessions, children participating in animal-assisted therapy programs, and staff members coordinating community outreach initiatives that had already touched hundreds of lives across Georgia. Lily Anderson, now 13 and carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced real darkness and emerged stronger, walked through the center's main corridor with Thor at her side. The German Shepherd moved with only the slightest limp from his injuries, his honorary Marine Corps collar gleaming against his thick fur. Together, they were heading to the morning briefing, where they would receive their assignments for the day. "Good morning, Lily." "Morning, Thor," called Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the center's director and a former Army psychologist who specialized in PTSD treatment. "Ready for another day of changing lives?" Thor's tail wagged once, his professional demeanor evident in the way he carried himself. Over the past months, he had been trained in advanced therapy techniques, learning to recognize the signs of panic attacks, provide grounding pressure during flashbacks, and offer comfort to trauma survivors in ways that human therapists sometimes couldn't match. Rebecca emerged from the administrative office where she had been reviewing the morning schedule. After completing an accelerated nursing program funded by the Memorial Foundation, she now served as the center's medical coordinator, finally achieving the dream she had deferred for so many years. "We have 3 new clients today," Rebecca announced, consulting her tablet. 2 veterans from the Iraq conflict and a teenage girl whose father was killed in Afghanistan. "Thor, you're specifically requested for the session with Staff Sergeant Williams. He's been resistant to traditional therapy but expressed interest in working with a military working dog." The transformation in their family's circumstances still felt surreal to Rebecca. The foundation had not only funded the healing center, but had provided them with a modest house on the center's grounds, ensuring that Thor could live with his family while fulfilling his professional duties. More importantly, it had given all of them a sense of purpose that transcended their individual struggles. Dylan Mitchell entered the main hall using a walking cane rather than his previous wheelchair, another sign of the healing that had taken place over the past months. His court-ordered community service had evolved into a full-time position as the center's peer counselor, where his personal experience with PTSD and his military background made him uniquely qualified to reach veterans who had given up on recovery. "Thor," Dylan said, approaching with the respectful demeanor he had maintained since their reconciliation. "I wanted to give you this before your session with Williams." He held out a small item, a photograph of Rex in his military working dog gear standing proudly beside a younger, healthier Dylan in desert camouflage. On the back, someone had written, "To Thor from your proud daddy, carry on the mission, love, Rex and Dylan." Lily accepted the photograph and clipped it to Thor's therapy vest, a visible reminder of the legacy he carried and the lives he was meant to touch. Williams lost his K-9 partner in Fallujah, Dylan explained quietly. Same kind of IED blast that got Rex and me. He's been carrying that guilt for 8 years, convinced he could have saved his dog if he'd been a better handler. Thor's ears perked up with understanding. This was the kind of pain he had been bred to heal, the inherited mission that connected him to his father and gave meaning to his own suffering. The first therapy session took place in the center's specially designed comfort room, furnished with soft seating, calming colors, and large windows that looked out on the peaceful gardens where other clients often walked during their recovery. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams was a large man in his 30s whose hands shook slightly when he wasn't holding something. He had arrived early and sat rigidly in a corner chair, his eyes darting toward the exits. "This is Thor," Lily said gently, allowing the German Shepherd to approach at his own pace. "He's here to help, if you'd like." Williams looked at Thor with a mixture of longing and fear. "He looks like Kaiser," he said softly. "My partner. Same coloring, same intelligent eyes." Thor moved closer, not quite touching Williams, but close enough that the veteran could feel his warm presence. The dog's breathing was calm and steady, a natural, grounding technique that helped anxious humans regulate their own breathing patterns. "Kaiser died because of me," Williams continued, his voice breaking. "I should have seen the wires. Should have called him back before he stepped on that pressure plate." Thor placed his head gently on Williams' knee, a gesture that was both comfort and absolution. In that simple contact, Williams seemed to find something he had been searching for: permission to forgive himself. "Dogs don't blame us for their sacrifices," Dylan said from his position near the door, speaking from hard-earned experience. "They choose to protect us because that's who they are." Kaiser's death wasn't your failure. It was his final gift to you and your squad. Over the following hour, Williams shared stories he had never told anyone about Kaiser's intelligence, his loyalty, the lives he had saved before making his ultimate sacrifice. Thor listened with the patience of a professional counselor, occasionally offering gentle pressure or a soft whine of understanding. By the end of the session, Williams was crying freely for the first time in 8 years, his hands buried in Thor's thick fur as he finally allowed himself to grieve properly for his fallen partner. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Williams asked as the session concluded. "Thor will be here," Lily promised, "as long as you need him." As the months passed, the center's impact grew exponentially. Thor worked with dozens of clients, his natural empathy and inherited training helping veterans, children, and families process trauma that had seemed insurmountable. Lily continued her education through a special program that allowed her to balance schoolwork with her responsibilities at the center, preparing for a future career in veterinary medicine and animal-assisted therapy. The story of the girl and her dog who saved 3 Marines had evolved into something much larger, a testament to the healing power of love, forgiveness, and purpose. Reporters continued to visit, documenting the miraculous transformations taking place at the center. But the real miracles happened quietly in therapy sessions where broken hearts learned to heal. Mrs. Patterson, now serving as the center's volunteer coordinator, often observed that Thor had fulfilled his father's mission in ways Rex could never have imagined. "That dog doesn't just detect danger," she would tell visitors. "He detects hope, and he gives it to people who thought they'd lost it forever." On quiet evenings, Lily and Thor would sit on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the Georgia sky in shades of gold and purple. Thor wore Rex's dog tag alongside his therapy credentials, carrying both his heritage and his purpose with the dignity of a true hero. "We did it, boy," Lily would whisper, scratching behind his ears. "We found our mission." Thor's tail would thump once against the wooden porch, a sound that had become the heartbeat of their new life, steady, strong, and full of promise for tomorrow's miracles. In the end, the greatest rescue hadn't happened in that dark alley 6 months earlier. It had happened every day since, as Thor continued his father's work of saving lives, one broken heart at a time. Dear friends, if this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Like Thor carrying his father's legacy, many of us carry burdens we never chose. Caring for aging parents, watching grandchildren grow up distant, feeling invisible in a world that seems to value youth over wisdom. But Thor's story reminds us that our greatest trials can become our most powerful purpose. That 12-year-old girl saw beyond her circumstances to help strangers, and a damaged veteran found redemption through service to others. In your golden years, you possess something invaluable. The perspective that comes from surviving life's storms, the wisdom earned through decades of love and loss. Your experience matters. Your voice counts. Whether it's mentoring a struggling young parent, volunteering at a local shelter, or simply listening to a neighbor's troubles, you have the power to be someone's Thor. The world needs your steady presence, your hard-won understanding, your capacity to see hope when others see only darkness. You're not too old to make a difference. You're perfectly seasoned for it. Sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear capes. They wear reading glasses and carry decades of stories worth sharing. What moment in your life taught you the most about resilience? Have you ever experienced the healing power of an unexpected friendship, human or animal? Please share your thoughts below.